Good day, everyone. This is your teacher, Ms. Mars, and in today's video lecture, I am going to continue discussing the remaining lessons that are not discussed yet under Unit 4, still the subject EM16, Language Learning Materials Development. So this time, allow me to share my screen. We'll talk about Lesson 5 under Unit 4. So here is my screen. Okay, let me stop sharing first because I have not actually clicked this share sound. Definitely there are some videos. So our focus on lesson 5 is the teaching speaking. It's materials for developing speaking skills. In previous lesson, we look into materials for developing the writing skills. So now let's check materials for developing speaking skills. Now, we know that we have the 4 speaking skills. We have to master fluency, vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar. So it's like this one here, non-negotiable. When we learn language, we have to make sure we know the grammar, we know the pronunciation, we know vocabulary, and we know fluency as well. Now, speaking skills and the need for relevant materials. One way to actually understand the notion of speaking skills, suggested by Weigate in 1987, is by viewing them in 2 basic aspects, and these are motor-receptive skills and the interaction skills. If we talk about motor-receptive skills, it actually involves our mastering of the sounds and structures, not necessarily in any particular context. So by the time we're trying to learn the sound system of the English language, we are mastering the motor-receptive skill. We have drills, we read words, we pronounce, we correct our mistakes and the likes. That is part of the motor-receptive skills mastery. When we talk about interaction skills, involves making decisions about what and how to say things in specific communicative situations. In this case, we already look at a specific context, no, to convey the right intentions or maintain relationships, because the world is so complex and people have different beliefs, so many principles, or we have so many backgrounds, very diverse. Everyone is, all the people are really diverse. Everybody is different from anybody. So that's why the interaction skills, it is another skill that we have to master aside from the motor receptive skills in order for us to be able to create or to have a good communication. This perception can be further understood by observing that these 2 sets of skills must not represent clear-cut distinctions or 2-stage operations, but from the start, structure must be taught in relation to use. So arguably, speaking skills are best developed when learners learn to eventually take control of their own performance. Because if the learners have the sense of ownership and they can take control of it, then they will be able to have a very good sense of, probably they can communicate with others, no, and they have external manipulation on the conversation that they are holding. Like they know how to do it, they know when to what to say, how to handle a conversation. And the second, language materials, as viewed by Tomlinson, should be created not only by writers but also by teachers and learners. So that means in creating or in the process of creating the second language materials, the teachers and the learners' perspective should be considered, because we have to look into the real scenario, no, the real classroom. And these language materials developers may not have really firsthand experience getting inside a classroom and being with the learners, especially if they are really just commissioned to be creating books. So Tomlinson's perception coincides nicely with Nonan's 1989 view that teaching communication should be seen as a process rather than a set of products, and closely related to what Breen calls the process syllabus. So we have 2 Like when we create syllabus, we always make sure you are part of the process of crafting the syllabus. Through that, we are certain that the students are involved in the creation of the material, because material, the syllabus is one of the materials. According to this syllabus, when materials are scripted by a writer, they appear in the form of pre-designed plan rather than the final production, are open to reinterpretation by the users of that plan. For example, whoever is the user may have a different interpretation and may have a different implementation of the syllabus because he has to localize it. And it is through such interaction that pre-designed sketches can be best processed and earn conditions to develop into upgrade materials that promote language learning. Yeah, it's true, we do have the pre-designed exemplars or mga sketches, mga curriculum guides, for example, in DepEd, we have the pre-designed na. So it will reach to the hands of the teachers and nahuman na siya. But what we will do is, as teachers, we have to make sure that it's open for tweaking in a way that we tweak it because we want to localize it and we want the guide to be personalized or to really address the needs of the learners. In other words, task implementation in the classroom actually serves a practical tool for relevant materials to be jointly created. So, Bali, you get something out from this and something out from the other, and you craft it. The teachers will do it together with the learners so that it will be relevant to the needs of the students. So this understanding helps explain why many coursebook activities composed from the writer's own assumption while disregarding the users of the book. So sometimes we look at most of the course book, we may see that it actually does not really address or murang na disregard ang users. The users are, of course, the teachers and the students. So if materials are constructed for speaking skills, the interactive process by the designer and the user should take place through speaking, since it would be unrealistic for participants to simply sit there and silently imagine how talk might work from a written script. So we have here some speaking strategies, can do introduce a topic first. We respond positively. We give time to think, clarify, and correcting. So for introducing a topic, oh, by the way, as a person who would engage in a conversation, that would be your way to start. And then responding positively, it's very nice of you. Okay, great. Giving time to think, well, let me see. Clarifying, sorry, what was that? Okay, correcting, no, not. And then trends in materials for speaking skills. So materials published over the past 5 decades have been clear indicators of how the key principles of communicative approaches are incorporated into speaking activities. Okay, we wanted our learners to be able to communicate, right? So in the mid-1960s, the learning of linguistic systems was emphasized during the time as the method to master a second language. And the in the 1970s witnessed a developing materials for speaking skills. This time, we call it the communicative revolution, in which meaningful activities now replace the mechanical language exercises, like focus on the linguistic system. So now we're focusing on communication. So the 1980s saw attempts to make the communicative approach less extreme so as not to put too much emphasis on use and ignore the learner's need for linguistic knowledge. So examples of the reaction against the strong version of the communicative approach were the criticism that the new methodology was attempting to replace the structural approach. And this is just a kind of history or background lang. So the early 1990s saw the idea of a multidimensional syllabus becoming more explicitly and systematically addressed, which opened up new possibilities for encompassing a more comprehensive series of teaching dimensions. We focus here on functions and the notions, the roles and the skills, the themes and the situations. And the main purpose of this type of syllabus, is pointed out by McDonough and Shaw in 1993, is to build actually this time a range of communicative criteria. So we see that from 1970s all the way to 1990s up until now, communicative or communication is really the focus now of second language acquisition or the second language teaching. No, at the same time as acknowledging the need to provide systematic practice in the formal priorities of the language or in language teaching in general. So the recognition of learner differences and the importance of divergent responses in learning have been reflected in materials developments over the decades. And educators and materials writers alike, they demonstrated a tendency to resist activities in which discussions invite right and wrong answers, because that would actually reduce the learning complexity. So the concept of the textbook could also imply that teachers are somehow deficient now in their ability and knowledge, and thus have to solely rely on the textbook as their primary source of knowledge. So that is true. If we are very bookish, it's really different when you talk about something and you experience, then you talk about something and you're just more on the theories. There is no practical how do I say this? You don't have any practical examples or situations that would make it more comprehensive. You know? A textbook can become a tyrant within the classroom, demanding there be no room for deviation from it or for personalized learning. And since the classroom environment is often not heterogeneous, but mixed to some degree in linguistic proficiency, interpersonal skill, age, academic background, gender, personality, language, aptitude, learning style, and other factors. One of the major concerns of language materials is the capability of catering for the diversity of needs which exist in most language classrooms. That's according to Noonan in 1991. And for example of this trend, let us examine three activity samples that actually deal with a similar theme, namely describing objects. It's just taken from the three English course books published in this year. So we have here the Streamline English, lesson 6, a nice flat. So it's basically describing, no? Students are asked to describe a room from a given picture. In Interchange, English for International Communication, the activity is same or different. And in Unit 12, what we can see as an activity, students are provided with several sets of pictures depicting different object items and invited to discover how these items differ from asking each other questions. And sa C naman, in language in use for pre-intermediate, activity 1 of unit 3, it talks about places. So invites learners to look at a picture of 5 different doors and imagine the rooms behind them. So for example, class in the 1980s, some theorists believe that the more sophisticated the syllabus, the more difficult to implement it in the classroom. And that is true. So materials development in recent years tends to prove the opposite. So as course design, this time it becomes more thoughtful. It also tries to make language teaching easier in the classroom, because if English language or the target language appears to be difficult to the students, they would really be demotivated to learn. And then it would also aim, if it is easier and it is the course design is better now, it would aim for less teacher preparation. So for example, okay, exercise 1. So there is this is taken from a textbook or from coursebook. There is a sofa in the living room radio. There isn't a radio in the living room. So this could be like, you have to describe it. You have to describe that. It's a nice flat, no? And then talking about places is also another example of activity. So we also have utilizing verbal sources from real life. So preparing materials would just be 1/3 of the job if you're a teacher, but it's really part of our job. So that is providing opportunities for learning. Implementing and modifying them are what helps bridge the gap between plans and effects. So we prepare materials at the same time. As teachers, we also need to know how to modify it. We need to know how to implement and modify the material. So to modify the materials, besides printed sources such as magazine articles or pictures as a springboard, it's your motivation for communication. Course developers can also utilize many verbal interactions that taken from real life scenarios and in the classroom, and the one that is used really like in conversation, not the mechanical one. So one method to seek for practical teaching ideas, as suggested by Tai in 1988, is by tapping learners' peer group interaction, or by taping rather learners' peer group interaction in the target language and analyzing it. It's through this type of exercise that typical conversational difficulties or obstacles can be identified and translated into problem-based strategies for the teaching of verbal communication. So we really need to make sure that our learners now are engaged in conversation and in communication. There is really, really very good avenue for them to practice. No? And another method is by finding opportunities to compare naturally occurring conversations with the designer's versions which deal with the same topic. Researchers have provided evidence that many conversations composed from the writer's own assumptions of spoken language do not always reflect actual context of use, and especially when they skip over many essential strategies required by real-life communication situations. And keeping a diary might also be a realistic way to collect resources for designing speaking activities with. That's also another way, to learn when you keep a diary using the target language, like in our case, English. And such resources can come from overhearing conversations in public places, from radio or even television interviews, from watching drama or movies, or even from our interaction with native speakers in the target language. So this one here, we are now giving opportunities for our learners for some kind of authentic experience. So that's the end of lesson 5. So this time, allow me to stop sharing my PowerPoint presentation. So class, I hope you learned a thing or two from our discussion today. And again, our topic is all about lesson 5. It talks about language materials in developing language materials for speaking skills. So I will see you on the next one. Our next topic will be lesson 6, and that will be listening skills. Okay, so thank you very much for watching, for viewing this video lecture. I will see you on the next one. Bye-bye.